Thank you. Just so you all are prepared, I was in Italy last week, and I'm based on the East Coast, and so I'm going through all of these different time zones. So in order to rise to the occasion and be as scholarly as everyone else is, I am going to be reading, but I'll try to be a little engaging, add some flair to it. But my brain is kind of mush at this point.
I thought you had a martini or something.
If only, I wish that was it. So through photogrammetry, I've created 3D models of 8 outdoor sculptures and 16 murals, as well as 8 African sculptures from the Philadelphia Museum of Art and 16 African instruments from the Charles L. Blockson Afro-American Collection hosted at Temple University Libraries. These models have been organized into a story map with an accompanying augmented reality iOS, not Android, mobile application. Not to be a hater, but it's what I have. There are an estimated 1,500 outdoor sculptures and 3,600 murals in the city of Philadelphia, which we also call Mural City. But those artworks can also be in flux, as some were installed as intentionally temporary and others have been removed for a variety of reasons. In an effort to limit the scope of this project to become both manageable and politically aligned with my work, I elected to apply the For Us bias, or FUBU, model and focus exclusively on a sample of outdoor sculptures and murals by Black artists. Asserting our agency to represent ourselves for ourselves as practitioners, interpreters, art makers, and beyond provides the opportunity to develop what interdisciplinary scholar of library and information science Andre Brock calls a transformative cultural philosophy of Black enactment rather than representation of performance, along with technical expertise, politics, and everyday life, all mediated through technology. During my time working on this project, it ultimately expanded into a virtual collage of local public artworks, museum and library collections objects, and spiritual and metaphysical objects in order to transform each included outdoor sculpture and mural into altars adorned with the latter elements. I specifically chose altars as the superimposed content based on my experience exploring the limitations and capabilities of various augmented reality tools, at which time I was waking up in the middle of the night trying to fit these metaphorical puzzle pieces together. I would sit in my living room near a coffee table I'd gradually transformed into my own altar, draped in a backless pillow sham from scraps of African fabric from my deceased maternal grandmother that she quilted, adorned with photos of family and friends, plants, a study Bible, crystals, candles, an abalone shell with white sage and palo santo, a sculpture that my mother's oldest sister sent to me, and other sentimental objects. So on some sleepless night at probably 4 o'clock in the morning, I gazed over at that table and suddenly found the inspiration for how to bring this project together in a manner that blended my practical goal of developing a project that combines photogrammetry, mapping, and augmented reality with my artistic and curatorial imagination. Digital artist and cultural critic Natrice R. Gaskin explains, augmented or layered space offers us new ways to map, view, encode, or decode traditional cultural systems and symbols with a dynamically changing information, sometimes digital in form and closely linked with the development of a technocultural network. As such, this project specifically applies Gaskin's techno-vernacular creative method of reappropriation via reclamation and adaptation through the application of image-based tracking to superimpose the aforementioned altars onto photographs of each public artwork within the mapping visualization. In what follows, I outline the processes and tools utilized to develop this project in an effort to share a methodological approach that centers not only Black scholarship, but also the needs of Black institutions. Digital humanities librarians often prioritize open access data models using open source tools to encourage equitable access, yet the field remains largely white at a rate of 71% for staff and 82% for librarians. As a GLAM professional who entered the field at a very small, under-resourced, understaffed Black institution with limited resources and capacity, my intention is to share my application of free and low-cost tools so that other GLAM professionals at small institutions with limited support for technology-centered digital projects might find a useful approach to share their own special collections and archival records. I'd like to note here that I am very active. I'm a lifetime member of the Association of African American Museums, and I was elected to participate in a Mellon-funded working group focused on traveling exhibits and shared collaborations to build capacity for member institutions. And within that group, I'm working with other Black GLAM and digital humanities folks to identify target areas for improvement that can be addressed through skill building workshops and prototyping. As such, this space will allow my colleagues and I to continue to test this and other workflows and share them broadly within the field and thus expand methods for curation of Black art, history, and culture using digital humanities tools and more. Let's see. It's gonna load. There it is. In order to generate the models of each sculpture, I use traditional photogrammetry using a Canon EOS 60D camera that I actually bought back in 2013 while I was working on my dissertation. On a 6-foot camera stand, I captured photographs of each sculpture, followed the Agisoft Metashape software workflow to generate the models and clean them up in Blender. And I created this TikTok to share my methodology, because later on I'll talk about how I want to share it outside of academia so that non-academic folks have access to it without it being locked behind a paywall. And I'm just gonna keep going, because that one. All right. So in order to generate the mural models and 2 of the outdoor sculptures, one of them is here, I used the Polycam LiDAR 3D scanner mobile app on an iPad Pro, which required a completely different process. Due to the height of the murals, I was unable to use the LiDAR scanning feature and instead used the applications feature that captures a number of photographs via the device's cameras. The user walks across space, angling up and down along the way to ensure that all corners of the mural were captured. The software generated models based on those photos. I downloaded the JPEGs and the model files. Those were imported into Blender as well to remove all of the extraneous pieces from the model, like the sky and the surrounding environment. I used the same method for the final 2 outdoor sculptures, Brick House and 3 Figures, which is the one that was just shown, because I just kind of happened to be on Penn's campus for a workshop and walked past the Brick House sculpture and thought, let me see if this works. When I did it with traditional photogrammetry, it wasn't really generating the model the right way. And so I went back with my phone. I just had an iPhone XR, so not a great device, and reinstalled the software, reactivated my subscription, and the model came out really, really well. So upon reflection, I would recommend this workflow over the other one, depending on the project timeline and funding. The latter one is much simpler and does the bulk of the work within the mobile app application, but it requires a monthly or annual paid subscription in order to download the models. The Agisoft Metashape photogrammetry workflow is a lot more involved and requires a device with a pretty advanced graphics card, but the hardware and software are available for one flat rate. As such, the organization would need to decide how much time and funding is available for this type of project and make decisions around hardware and software accordingly. So after embedding the 3D assets, the next step was to develop the mapping visualization through ArcGIS Story Maps, which I have a subscription to through my university, of course. I used the guided tour template. I'll let that load. To insert an interactive map directly into the website and add a text box for each image. So it looks a little different on the web because it has the pop-up, but since it's embedded into the presentation, this is the format that it uses. So I have an image of the artwork, a title and date and artist, description text with a note for a web link if you want to learn more about it. And instead of kind of doing curatorial labels all on my own, I found existing language on the web and used that and then linked out to it so you can read it in its full context. And then there's a button to view the 3D model right below. So this is on all of them. Some of them don't have the read more. Some of them, like 2 or 3, I did have to create my own description of them. So the guided tour begins in South Philly, runs through Center City, loops around West Philly, and travels through North Philly, ending in Germantown. Next, I embedded I'm going to have to click on something because this is going to take forever to get all the way down. There we go. Okay. Next, I embedded the entire collection of 3D models for the sculptures, the murals, and then the TikTok showing how I did this work, which you all already saw and is not going to really play here, both of the TikToks. And then I finished it off with a song that inspired me as I worked on the project, My Skin, My Logo by Solange featuring Gucci Mane, produced by Tyler, the Creator, and Steve Lacy, from her When I Get Home, 2019 album. And the line, "Guap not polo, my skin, my logo," specifically resonated with me through the development of this project. I was intentional about excluding artwork that depicted Blackness without including a Black artist. And the phrase also aligned with my personal and professional philosophies of all Black everything, or as LA actress, producer, writer Issa Rae, which my shirt is also from, commented at the 2017 Emmys, "I'm rooting for everybody Black," which is inscribed on my favorite coffee mug to drink on that I would drink from while I was working on this project as well. Next, I began curating the 24 individual altars in Blender. For each altar, I identified objects that represented each of the 5 elements. To represent spirit or ether, I selected an African sculpture or instrument and framed photos of the artist, the artwork, and any other relevant theme. The air category is represented by such objects as basil, lavender, and chamomile plants, cinnamon incense, a singing bowl, or a feather. The items representing air are often connected to those representing water, such as an abalone shell, which might hold a rosemary cleansing stick, a rose petal sage bundle, or bay leaves. The other water signifiers include rose, black, or cinnamon soap. Fire was represented by candles and tea lights in intentionally selected colors, and earth was represented by some combination of 3 to 5 crystals. I placed each of the designated objects around each imported outdoor sculpture model and in front of each imported mural model, because when you flip a mural model on the back, it's not really interesting. It's just an inversion of the image. In some instances, I placed objects on plates, soap dishes, or tables, depending on the space and structure of the public artwork model. And all of my sculpture models rotate 360 on a loop, and all of the murals kind of pivot back and forth. On the 6th iteration of building the AR project from scratch in Unity, I was able to develop a workflow that works successfully with no bugs. It's very tedious, and I've outlined it fully in the publication version of it, the futures.clear.org. Whole workflow is there with links to useful things like how to get it on the Apple App Store and all of that. But in the interest of time, I won't go into any of that. But if you are interested, either go to the futures.clear.org and find my article, or contact me and I can get you the information. Are we going to the next slide? There we go. So Sacred Geographic Superimpositions is essentially, my entree into the larger Black speculative project to apply an Afrofuturist conceptual framework to the application of DH tools. In this project, photogrammetry, story mapping, and AR provide a method for cultural preservation and curation as a means to honor those artworks which were in Philadelphia at some point during the project's development. Cultural critic and originator of the term Afrofuturism, Mark Derry, explains, as you see on the screen, it's worth pointing out in the context of what I've chosen to call Afrofuturism, that the mojos and goofer dust of Delta blues, together with the Lucky Charms, fetishes, effigies, and other devices employed in syncretic belief systems such as voodoo, hoodoo, santeria, mambo, and macumba, function very much like the joysticks, data gloves, Waldos, and spaceballs used to control virtual realities. Jerome Rothenberg would call them technologies of the sacred, hence my title. In that discussion, sociologist and hip-hop scholar Trisha Rose comments, ancestor worship in Black culture is a way of countering a historical erasure. This project is indeed a spiritual scholarly endeavor to document and celebrate ephemeral Black public art in Philadelphia in a manner that transports them from the ancestral plane into the ancestral plane of the transformative archive to grapple with the power structures that govern the way we preserve, gather, and share historical documents in a manner that brings scholarly research and data curation out of the academy and into a curated space grounded in storytelling and interpretation. Some public artworks that fit into the scope of this project were not included because they had already been removed. Murals, walls get painted over, buildings are torn down, all of that. Others were included but not intended to be permanently installed in Philadelphia. There was a traveling exhibition of sculptures that moved around and happened to coincide with the time that I was working on this project. And the remainder could be removed at any moment. As such, the augmented reality output of this project was developed in an effort to celebrate those temporary and semi-permanent public artworks as sacred spaces adorned with objects pulled from my own spiritual practice. In other words, this phase of the project was my opportunity to use DH tools to supplant the proverbial flowers that are often given to honor someone at the end of their life. The primary impetus for this project was to bring together the development of specific DH skills, photogrammetry, data visualization through mapping, and interactivity with AR to establish a workflow that could be utilized by small institutions with limited capacity and resources. There were a number of issues along the way which led to the phrase repeated between a friend and myself, technology is gonna technology. As I shared my frustrations with learning each skill, the software not functioning as expected, or being generally overwhelmed by the slow pace of the project against a loudly ticking self-imposed deadline, we would repeat to each other, technology is gonna technology. While it never immediately eased my irritation, it did give me a sort of mantra to remind myself this is supposed to be difficult and to keep pushing. Another motivating source of frustration lied in the fact that online tutorials to learn how to use the different software programs, especially Blender and Unity, were not only scarce, especially when the scope had to be limited to tutorials that were from 2019 or sooner due to consistent version updates, but also none of the folks in the tutorials were Black or female. This particular point encouraged me to find some patience within myself to keep working on this project so that I can contribute to the solution. Additionally, I've shared my workflows on TikTok and in a digital publication that is not locked behind a paywall to reach additional audiences outside of the Academy and contribute to the transformation of DH to include more Black practitioners. Thank you.
And so offering comments on Synatra's project and talk that she will all like that. But is an assistant professor of history and environmental studies here at USC and is the director of both English Collections tomorrow. Yeah.
Thanks, Curtis. Thank you, Synatra, for this. I was going to start by summarizing the project, but you've done such a good job of that, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'll start with what I love about this project, which is that it is a productively difficult to categorize project in a way that I think some of the most interesting and innovative DH projects often are. I really love your phrase virtual collage, which stood out to me on hearing the talk. And it's a collage both of sources and materials, but then also of technologies, and procedures and tools and applications. So I'm not going to summarize what you're doing, but I do want to step through the technologies that you're bringing into combination. First of all, this is a story map. It's a way of guiding visitors through space. It's a way of layering stories on top of place. We know what story maps are. We know what they're good for. Second, it is a set of 3D models captured from physical reality and then remixed with other 3D models and digital objects to create these digital altars. And then third, it is an iPhone app that pairs with the story map as a means of accessing that 3D content. And this, as someone who's involved with an iPhone development project, this is no small thing, especially to do on your own and without prior technical training. And specifically what you're doing here is a really innovative technical application of image anchors. So the images in the story map are stored in a database in the iPhone application. So when the iPhone sees the image, it presents the linked 3D object. And I think this is a really creative way of leveraging the smartphone as a second screen to enhance the viewing experience with a story map. It literally and figuratively extends the story map. So if those are the major parts of the containers for this project, the technologies and the tools, Synatra uses them to center and elevate and celebrate Black histories in Philadelphia, particularly through public art. And so we end up with, and this is my attempt to sort of expand all of the parts of this virtual collage, a project that is a documentary project, that is an index to this Black public art, that is an exhibit of it, and that is also an artwork, because you are remixing this art with these other objects. And so it's a project that on the whole really rewards exploration and curiosity. And talking with you last night when I learned that you're engaged in museum education, a lot of this project started to click for me. But that's not all. The project is also a model for the low barrier use and application of off-the-shelf tools. And importantly, the documentation that you provided to show the pipeline for how other people can do these things as well. This project stands then as a model for replicability. And thinking about my classroom practice, I could imagine doing something similar with students and having this kind of a story map with 3D models be a collective group project over the course of a semester. So I have two big questions about some of the concepts in the project. The first deals with the 3D models and the question of scale and embodiment. So many of these public artworks in their physical existence in the real world, their scale matters a lot in terms of the embodied experience that these viewers have with them. In this project, you shrink them down, you make them miniature. So I'm curious how you think about scale and embodiment and what you gain and what you lose by taking these often quite large pieces and making them something that could almost fit in the palm of your hand.
So I'll start with what you lose. Let me go to the first slide. So this is a sculpture of Octavius V. Cato, who is a major figure in Black history, particularly in Philadelphia. And this sculpture stands in front of City Hall. And it was sculpted by a Black artist, I believe. I'm not gonna try to guess. I don't remember a lot of the things because there's so many different pieces that went into this. But the location of this sculpture really does matter. The fact that it is so centrally located in the city to represent Black folks trying to get the vote, or Black men, I'll say specifically. I'm working on a project about the Black women's suffrage movement in DC, and so I'm very aware of the gender politics involved in all of this. And he was shot in the process. And so the location definitely matters. When you view the brick house sculpture, which is the only sculpture included in the project that was sculpted by a Black woman, everything else was by a Black man. When you see it on Penn's campus, it's in a strange location in terms of there's a tree in the way and all that, but the sculpture is massive. And even in doing the photogrammetry with the Polycam app, I wasn't able to get the top of her head, and the hair texture really matters. All of that went into it really does matter. But there are a lot of folks that will never find themselves in Philadelphia, right? There are, like I said, sculptures that were included in the project that were only there for about 4 months, something like that, and then went on to other cities. So this project kind of gives you an opportunity to see where those things existed. There are photos that show it in real space, so you can see kind of by comparison to the things around it, how big it might be. But I get this opportunity to kind of reinterpret, remix these objects and turn them into these altars to celebrate the fact that they were in Philadelphia at some point, or still are in Philadelphia. And then folks, like I said, who are outside of the region get to see these objects as well, which is why I opted for image-based tracking instead of a location-based AR app.
Terrific. And then I want to ask about some of the bigger frame and where you're headed next. I'd love to hear you talk more about the Afrofuturist angle, and particularly how you see that intersecting with and informing your use of digital technologies. And then recognizing that this project was, I think, also a way for you to learn these technologies by doing them. I've done this myself, and I love a good self-assigned project-based learning. Where are you going next? What, after having done all of this work with mapping, with photogrammetry, with 3D modeling, with mobile development, standing on top of this project, what do you see as your next DH ambition?
So I'll work backwards because I think the answer to your second question is going to lead me to the first one. So I'm actually working on a VR project right now. I have created a 3D model of a Black woman-owned bookstore in the Fishtown area of Philadelphia called Harriet's Bookshop, named for Harriet Tubman. And there's a sister store on the Jersey side called HiDW's Bookshop. And there's a pop-up in Paris, Josephine's Bookshop, for Josephine Baker. So there's HiDW. It's a great little thing that Janine Cook is doing with bookstores, and her space is very curated. She's giving you an experience when you walk into it. It's not just a bookstore, but it's like a space you want to be in. She has programming there, of course. And so I made this 3D model of it, and I am turning it into a virtual exhibition space. So I'm reusing all of the models from this project, from another project that's on African art in the Philadelphia Museum of Art collection, which were also used in this. So I'm reusing these models over and over again and then kind of adding more. So for that project, I'm adding 3D models of books that will automatically open to a specific page to read an excerpt that you can see it and hear it narrated with an AI-generated voice that uses a Black woman's voice, which was really cool. Paid tool, of course, in order to get the specific voice I wanted, but there are other Black women's voices on there that just didn't match my aesthetic. And I've got a research stipend, so I'm able to just kind of pay $50 to have a month of this and then cut it off, right? So yeah, you're able to hear a narrated page or piece of a page about one of the artists that's featured in that. So I've highlighted the Black women who are from Philadelphia first because there are only 7 or 8 of them in the entire PMA collection. And I've done a lot of research on the Black artists in that collection. So I started there, and then I expanded to include quilts from the G's Ben collection, which were also primarily from Black women. There's 1 Black man that's included in that collection, I believe. And so I'm just kind of adding more and more things into that project and thinking through what is the point of having a VR version of this stuff? What is it that you can do in VR that you can't do in physical space, which we've talked about because with the next project that you'll see. Because with physical space, you can't touch the objects, right? You can't walk into a museum unless it's the Please Touch Museum. You can't walk in and just pick things up. And while you may not get the weight of it in VR, you at least get to kind of bring it closer to your face and kind of explore it a little in a different way that you can't in physical space. So I'm thinking through like what types of interactions make more sense in VR, which leads me to the Afrofuturism because it is a very speculative practice, right? I love Afrofuturism because it represents politically what I'm interested in, which is this creative aspect of speculating about the past, present, or future using technology or magic in order to think about where we might be headed. It doesn't have to be a utopia, it can be a dystopia, it can just be a reinterpretation of something that really did happen in real life. It can be Black Panther, but it doesn't have to be that, you know? There are criticisms of it from African futurism that it does not explore the lived realities of Africans on the continent, which I absolutely agree with. But I do see that there's a use for it as an African American, just to kind of use that creative imagination to reconnect with things in a different way. And so I'm using that as my foundation for the way that I approach using digital tools, which obviously you can see in this project, right? It's got the spirituality, but it's technology, it's reinterpreting things that existed in physical space. And one thing I try to be very clear about is where the actual physical thing ends and where my speculation begins, so that as an anthropologist, that's really important to me, so folks know, like, this is where we get creative and funky with it, but it is a real thing, and this is what it looked like or it looks like.
Terrific, thank you. I'm going to open the floor to questions.
Should I be calling?
Yes.
I love the combination of the artwork and cultures. Could you talk a little bit about the decisions you made in terms of scale? Obviously, some statues are massive. You weren't putting in old IDPs, relative. Can you talk about those decisions?
The decisions for scale.
How you explain to story map users or after users the altarpieces themselves?
So I will say I do not explain. I have a spreadsheet to just remind myself what they are individually because there's 24 of them and each individual altar has probably 10 to 15 objects around it and they're not all the same. So there's a whole lot, and because of the way that the app works, can't put all of that in the app. I could have done it in the story map perhaps. So that's actually a very good thing to call out that I might consider making an edit to. But in terms of scale, what I tried to do as best I could, because it was difficult to know, like, well, this thing is this tall and this object is this. A lot of these objects I didn't create the model for myself, like the candles and the crystals and things. I was able to find those on Sketchfab. So I kind of tried to use my logic to figure out how small this might be by comparison to the object. But in some cases, I made a very different decision. I'll demo the Cato statue at the end, or when we do the demos, I'll show you all. But there are pillars behind him that I did not make 3D models of, and so, in their place, I put very large candles to represent those pillars because there's text on them, and I felt like that was an important thing to replicate in the AR experience, but I didn't want to. Doing this entire space it's a very busy place, and there were like students on field trips walking past and in my way, and being young people, being teenagers, people walking. Whenever I was doing this, people were always asking me questions, which I really did enjoy, explaining to people what I'm doing and why and all of that. But it's very distracting, and so instead of doing all 6 things or 7 things that are included in this space, and there's actually something in front of him too. I just used other things to represent those, and by scaling those up so that they kind of stand out a little bit more. Yes.
So I love seeing this being from Philadelphia, of course. So it's really nice to see a lot of the artwork being represented. You've done statues, you've done some murals. Have you thought about also doing some buildings too? And just being from Philadelphia, I know there was a very important Black architectural firm that was a model for Saxon and Capers for a lot of other ones. And some of the buildings are being knocked down, and I didn't know if you would be interested in scanning some of those to preserve some of that history, because I think it's like an overlooked thing inside Philadelphia.
I think you're right about that. I have not thought about scanning the exterior of buildings. I've done the modeling on for the interior. I have a 360 camera that I have not used yet that one of these days I will play with to create some more content. But I have not considered doing an actual building. But I think that's a great point, because even the museum was designed by a Black architect, Julian Abel, whose great-grandnephew is also an architect and designed the National Museum for African American History and Culture. And we've got an oral history with him in our archive, which is really, really amazing to listen to. But I think that's an excellent point, that the buildings themselves are also very important. Yes.
I love that you included in this story mapping song that relates to your experience of creating it and inspired to it. Because something that I think is humanist is that we often have music, right? That's a part of our workflow, but it's something that we could sort of erase when we actually present it. And I know that Mike as well was talking about with his work that you were recording like ambient sounds, right? And so I'm wondering, like, we're seeing this without sound, and I'm wondering, like, what else is the role of sound? Is there another role of sound in your project?
Not in this one. But in the VR one, there is. I mentioned that I used the AI tool to generate the narration of the text, and I wanted a Black woman's voice, and I wanted her to sound a specific way, and so I was able to kind of scroll through, I think, 5 or so of them, and I searched for a tool that had that specifically because I didn't want a computer voice, and I didn't want a non-Black voice. And then I'm kind of also having to teach her how to pronounce different things, which is fun. But so that's really important. I would like to have music in that space. There are musical scores in the Blockson collection at Temple that I'm thinking about potentially bringing into that project so that you can also play music, because in the actual bookstore there's a record player. And so I wanted to kind of bring that little aspect into the experience, because there's all these different, senses that we can play with in VR, and then there are some that we can't. So doubling down on those that we can work with are very important.
Yes.
Yeah. This is fantastic work, first of all. I found it just immensely engaging. I think what, to me anyway, is so interesting and compelling about the work is that you put so much of yourself and your own personality. It's also fantastic and engaging, is really central in the work. It is, though, like even in your presentation, you're telling us, we hear about your grandmother and the things she kept, and voices are very important to you. We get the story of how you created the work and telling yourself, it's supposed to be difficult and all that. And obviously that personal touch is really, really central, not only in the presentation, but in the work itself, which is, to my mind, so refreshing. For scholarly work and often digital work, where it's often trained into us to put personality kind of to the side and have pretenses to objectivity. And you really seem to be pushing back against that impulse very, very intentionally with great success. So I guess invite you to sort of comment on how you're thinking about creating that real personality and intimacy in the work.
Yeah, so it's funny, I was thinking about this very point this morning for a talk I'll be doing in November, just to kind of introduce myself and why I'm doing this work. And I find that when I kind of let the Dr. Smith thing go and I'm just Synatra, or Frankie as my family calls me, then people can kind of hear, my target audience, right, can hear what I'm trying to say. If I'm not using words that are not accessible to them, if I sprinkle in some pop culture references, or like my shirt that's from Insecure, for example, it also kind of helps me stay a little light and enjoy the moment and not get caught up in my nerves. But I think as I've kind of let that guard down a little bit more, I've been able to engage with other folks in more interesting ways that everyone feels like they can contribute to conversations, and they're not intimidated by, oh, this person has a doctorate. Because at the end of the day, we're all here for knowledge production, right? And so I want to make other folks to feel like they can contribute to the work that I'm doing as well, and ask questions and not feel like they might look stupid or something like that. Yes?
Does Philadelphia have a public arts commission or like a central body that oversees these works of art, or how is it connected between like the museum and you mentioned this on but I was thinking a commission would definitely want to promote your project or share it with others.
So there is, and I think I tried to connect with them, but it was during the pandemic and just being it, even there's a, what is that thing? Monument Lab is a thing that exists in Philly as well. And it was just really difficult to get in touch with people, partially because of the pandemic, I think. And also I was brand new and no one had ever heard of me before. And so they're like, I don't know what this girl's doing, but we got these other fires, you know? Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of hard, but maybe they'll care now.
It seems like these collections are there, and unfortunately, sometimes there's not a lot of information about them, and so to have someone who's done all this work, it's amazing.
Now, I will say for a lot of the work that I'm doing at the museum, we have our own library and archives blog that I'm able to publish on to give more information about the Black artists in the collection. I worked on a Wikidata project for a couple of years to make sure that they have enhanced digital visibility and that they're searchable, and all of the research is there, and with a bibliography so folks can kind of go back and find more information. And then we do have a PMA Stories blog that's like external facing for the institution to kind of share little fun stories about things that we experience in our day-to-day work that we can, write about on the blog. I haven't written about this project there. I think this is probably more my temple side of things, and I also just kind of keep my head down and I'm in the weeds doing things and forget that, like, hey, maybe you should talk a little bit more about what you're doing and why, and share it with people so they know about it. But I'm working on it, Yes.
We got 5 more minutes, so maybe just like 2 more questions.
Okay.
Just building on your the attention to like sharing this, I think I'm really captivated by your use of like TikTok to show your workflow and to really potentially bring in a whole new audience into the production of these things. But I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit in terms of like what kind of feedback are you getting from potential new voices entering the space?
So once upon a time during the pandemic, I thought I would be TikTok famous. I am not. I am not at all. I don't think I get a ton of hits. I'm probably half of the hits that I'm getting on this because of the presentations. I might be at like 50 at this point. But I like the fact that I can embed those videos directly into the presentation. I can share them really easily. You can find the things on TikTok, and I'm trying to think through the biggest challenge is like, how do you make a video doing this type of work? The photogrammetry ones were interesting enough, but building the AR app was where I wanted to go next. And like, who wants to watch me drag and, on Unity? Like, it's not really engaging to look at. So I haven't quite figured that one out yet. I am going to do it. I just am still thinking through like, what would be the way to make that look interesting in a short format, even though I know there are TikToks that are like 10 minutes. I'm not interested in those. I don't stay on those. So you get a smooth 60 seconds before, attention spans are totally lost. So I'm still thinking about like what additional content I might be able to put on TikTok, but I really did want to at least put something out there. I scroll through TikTok on my lunch break. It's my thing that I do, my guilty pleasure. And there's a lot of like educational content on the platform that I really enjoy, and people making things and showing you how they did things that I really like looking at. So I just wanted to kind of be a part of that, even if I'm not TikTok famous. It's okay. Yes.
So I have no idea how you would do this, but thinking about, I guess, the attachment, the interactivity, when I think of an altar, in Saku shrines and things, these are places where people are setting things. It'd be very cool if there was a way on these altars, if you put out these objects that you've thought about and researched, and create a way for your user to pick up and put on, and then they are engaging and making meaning with you. And this is leveraging them to stop and think about, read, and learn. about these objects that you've curated for that stick?
I know the smile on my face is getting bigger and bigger because I'm really glad you said that. In the VR project, that's something that I want to do. I have all of these models in there. I've got one of each object, maybe not every single object, but one of most of the objects in there. And I was thinking like that could be an activity that you do in the VR environment of like you learn about the object and then these, maybe a pop-up to tell you what each of those candles and crystals and things represent and then kind of figure out how would you, as the user, want to create your own altar.
That'd be really curious. You as a creator can see what people, like through the informatics of you make the harvest, who chooses what, if like creations, so
Yeah.
you can find out what is especially connected.
What is something? I need to write this down. All right, thank you.